The hospital was unusually quiet that night. White lights reflected across long, empty corridors. Dr. Alexander moved calmly between patient rooms. He had worked many night shifts like this before. Nothing about the evening felt extraordinary. To him, it was just another routine schedule. He had no idea everything was about to change. Alexander was known for his strict, rational thinking. He trusted science more than anything else. Faith, in his view, was a psychological crutch. He believed medicine explained every outcome. Miracles were stories for emotional comfort. Inside the hospital, only data mattered. That belief had guided his entire career. One patient under his care stood out that night. A young man, stable, with no alarming symptoms. Heart rate, oxygen, and pressure were normal. Recent tests showed no immediate complications. Alexander reviewed the charts with confidence. There was no indication of imminent danger. Everything appeared completely under control. As he walked down the hallway, soft voices echoed. A family sat near the wall, whispering prayers. A woman clutched a rosary tightly in her hands. Her lips moved constantly, repeating the same name. Alexander tried to ignore the scene at first, but the name reached him more than once. Carlo Acutis. The doctor frowned slightly as he kept walking. He believed prayer created false hope. Families, he thought, needed facts, not faith. Religion had no place in medical decisions. He chose not to intervene or comment. Still, the name lingered in his thoughts. It felt strangely persistent. Minutes later, something unexpected happened. An elderly man appeared at the end of the corridor. He wore no uniform, badge, or lab coat. His presence felt calm, but strangely intentional. He walked directly toward Alexander. The surrounding noise seemed to fade away. It felt like time slowed down. The man stopped directly in front of the doctor. He looked at Alexander with steady eyes. Then he spoke his full name clearly. Alexander froze, shocked by the familiarity. He was certain they had never met. He asked who the man was. The stranger did not answer immediately. After a brief silence, the man spoke calmly. He mentioned the name Carlo Acutis again. Alexander felt an uncomfortable chill. He did not understand why that name followed him. The man's tone was not threatening, but it carried absolute certainty, like a statement of fact. Then the warning came without hesitation. "Your patient will die tonight," the man said. Alexander reacted with disbelief and irritation. He immediately defended his diagnosis. There was no medical reason for such a claim. He assured the man the patient was stable. The stranger did not argue. Before leaving, the man added one final detail. "Remember this hour," he said quietly. Alexander glanced at his watch instinctively. It read exactly 10:47 p.m. He smiled dismissively, almost amused. To him, the warning meant nothing. He had no idea it would haunt him. Alexander returned to the patient's room with calm precision. The monitors still displayed stable, reassuring numbers. The young man slept quietly, breathing at an even pace. Nothing suggested the kind of danger the stranger described. Alexander felt his confidence return almost instantly. He told himself the warning was meaningless. Then he moved on to the next task. As the night deepened, the hospital grew even quieter. Distant footsteps echoed like faint taps in a tunnel. A few nurses spoke in low voices at the station. Alexander poured himself a strong cup of coffee. He opened more charts, focused on routine details, but the sentence kept returning uninvited. "Your patient will die tonight." He tried to rationalize the encounter logically. Maybe the man was a confused visitor. Maybe he had overheard something and misinterpreted it. Maybe it was a cruel coincidence or random assumption. Alexander had met unstable people in hospitals before. This was a place where fear brought strange behavior. That explanation felt safe, so he held on to it. Around 11, a nurse approached him cautiously. Her face was tense, her voice unusually soft. She said the patient's family wanted to speak with him. Alexander sighed, annoyed by the constant anxiety. He told her the patient was stable and monitored. He asked her to keep the family calm. but the nurse's eyes showed worry. Alexander stepped into the hallway and heard prayers again. The same woman clutched her rosary like a lifeline. Her shoulders shook as she whispered through tears. She repeated Carlo Acutis' name again and again. This time, Alexander didn't just feel irritation. A strange discomfort settled in his chest. He walked away faster than before. Back inside the room, he reviewed the patient's chart again. He checked labs, imaging, notes, and medication history. Everything remained within acceptable ranges. There was no clear risk of sudden collapse. Still, he ordered a quick recheck of vitals, not because he believed the warning, but because he wanted to silence his own mind. Near midnight, a monitor beeped softly. It was a small irregularity, barely noticeable. Alexander looked up without concern at first. Minor fluctuations happened all the time on night shifts. He adjusted a setting and watched for a moment. He expected the numbers to stabilize quickly. They didn't. The values began drifting downward slowly. Not dramatically, but enough to catch his attention. Alexander narrowed his eyes and leaned closer. He called a nurse to verify the readings. They stood in silence watching the screen. The room felt strangely heavier. Something was starting to shift. Alexander ordered additional tests immediately. His voice was steady, professional, controlled, but his thoughts were no longer calm. The stranger's words returned like an echo. He told himself it was still coincidence, but his heartbeat quickened without permission. He hated that he felt afraid. Outside, the family's voices rose with desperation. The mother cried out, Carlo Acutis' name louder now. Her grief seemed to fill the hallway. Alexander heard it clearly through the door. For the first time, he couldn't ignore it. A chill ran down his spine, and doubt quietly entered the room. The medical team gathered quickly around the bed. Monitors began sounding more frequently and sharply. The patient's vital signs dropped without clear cause. Alexander issued orders with automatic precision, yet something inside him began to crack. He had never seen such a sudden decline, not without warning signs beforehand. Interventions followed one after another relentlessly. Oxygen levels were adjusted and medications administered. Every step followed established medical protocol. Still, the patient's body refused to respond. It felt as if treatment met an invisible wall. Alexander clenched his jaw in frustration. Control was slipping through his fingers. A piercing alarm cut through the room. The heart rhythm turned dangerously irregular. The team exchanged silent, worried glances. No one spoke what everyone was thinking. Alexander felt cold sweat on his forehead. The warning echoed clearly in his mind. Tonight. Resuscitation protocol was initiated immediately. Hands moved with trained speed and urgency. Each second stretched into unbearable length. The air felt thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Alexander glanced at the clock against his will. Time continued forward without mercy. The warning no longer sounded absurd. Outside the room, the family prayed desperately. The mother collapsed to her knees in the hallway. She repeated Carlo Acutis' name through sobs. Some staff members watched with quiet compassion. Others avoided looking altogether. Alexander heard everything from inside. His focus began to fracture. The patient's heart weakened further. The monitor line shook erratically. Alarms rang continuously without pause. Alexander shouted instructions with strained urgency, yet he felt completely powerless. This kind of helplessness was unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. For a brief moment, Alexander looked toward the door. He thought he saw a figure standing in the corridor, the same elderly silhouette from earlier. He blinked, convinced exhaustion was playing tricks. The doorway stood empty and silent. Another alarm pulled him back to reality. Time was running out. Resuscitation efforts continued without success. The team showed visible signs of exhaustion. The patient's breathing became erratic and shallow. Alexander felt a tight knot in his chest. Nothing in the tests explained the collapse. Medical logic had completely failed. Certainty was dissolving fast. A long, sharp tone filled the room. The monitor displayed a nearly flat line. Silence fell instantly over the team. Alexander slowly raised his hand. He ordered one final attempt, but deep down, he already knew. The end was approaching. The clock continued ticking loudly on the wall. Each second felt like a verdict. Alexander avoided looking at the exact time. He didn't want confirmation of his fear. The warning was unfolding before his eyes. Science could not stop it. Nothing could. The monitor released a long, continuous tone. The line straightened before everyone in the room. The medical team froze in complete silence. Alexander felt the air leave his lungs. No one spoke for several endless seconds. The moment felt heavier than any alarm. Reality had arrived without mercy. A nurse finally broke the silence in a trembling voice. She asked for the official time of death. Alexander lifted his eyes slowly and reluctantly. They went straight to the digital clock on the wall. Red numbers glowed with brutal clarity. It read exactly 12:47 a.m., the same hour he had been warned about. A hollow sensation spread through Alexander's chest. Every word spoken by the stranger returned vividly. He remembered his disbelief and quiet mockery. Nothing in the patient's chart explained this outcome. There had been no prior warning signs, no medical mistake to point to. The prediction had unfolded perfectly. Time of death. 12:47, Alexander said softly. His voice sounded unfamiliar, almost fragile. The team began disconnecting equipment in silence. No one spoke of effort or success. The room felt charged with something unnamed, something none of them could explain, something that lingered in the air. Alexander stepped out of the room slowly. His legs felt weak and unsteady. The hallway stretched endlessly before him. Each step echoed loudly in his mind. Never had a death shaken him like this. Never had a warning come true so precisely. Nothing felt the same anymore. The family was informed moments later. The mother collapsed, crying uncontrollably. Yet between sobs, she whispered gratitude. She said they had been prepared for this night. They knew it would end exactly like this. Carlo Acutis had warned them, she said. Alexander listened without interrupting. Their response pierced him deeply. There was no anger in their voices, no accusations toward the medical staff, only a calm acceptance he could not understand. He wondered where such peace came from, how faith could exist in such pain. It dismantled him internally. The hospital chaplain approached him gently. He did not speak of blame or punishment. He simply said something extraordinary had occurred, not something seen every day. Alexander did not argue or respond. For once, he had nothing to refute. He stood in silent reflection. For the first time in years, Alexander doubted. He questioned his absolute trust in science. He questioned his rejection of the spiritual. Medicine still mattered deeply to him, but it no longer felt complete. Something beyond measurement existed, and he could no longer deny it. That night, Alexander did not return to work. He sat alone in a quiet room. The hour replayed endlessly in his mind. 12:47 burned into his memory. The warning had been fulfilled exactly, and with it, his old certainty died. Something new had begun. The days that followed felt unfamiliar to Alexander. He returned to his duties, but something was different. He examined patients with a quieter presence. The certainty he once carried was gone. He no longer felt like the final authority. Every case reminded him of his limitations. The exact hour remained etched in his mind. He began listening more carefully to his patients. Their fears, hopes, and beliefs mattered now. He noticed how much comfort faith gave them. Before, he had dismissed it instantly. Now he observed it with respect. He no longer argued when God was mentioned. Silence became his response. One afternoon, Alexander returned to the chapel. This time, he entered with intention. He sat down slowly and took a deep breath. He wasn't searching for proof or explanations. He simply wanted to understand what had happened. For the first time, he spoke softly. He didn't know if anyone was listening. His words came out awkward and sincere. He admitted his pride and resistance. He confessed how certain he had been before. The memory of the exact hour overwhelmed him. His throat tightened as emotion surfaced. Tears appeared without warning. He had reached the bottom. Over time, Alexander chose to change. He did not abandon medicine or science. Instead, he changed how he practiced them. Humility replaced arrogance. Listening became as important as diagnosing. He learned that healing wasn't always curing. Some wounds needed presence, not solutions. Eventually, he began sharing his story carefully, not to force belief on anyone, but to warn others about human limits. He described the warning exactly as it happened, the precise hour and the undeniable outcome. People listened in stunned silence. Many saw themselves in his doubt. Alexander never mocked faith again. He never claimed to have all the answers. He remained a doctor with questions. But he no longer closed the door to mystery. He accepted that reality was larger than logic. Denying it would not make it disappear. Humility became his foundation. Every time he looks at a digital clock, he remembers. 12:47 is no longer just a time. It marks the death of his arrogance and the birth of something honest and new, a harder path, but a truer one, where science and mystery coexist, without fear or contempt. Today, Alexander speaks with clarity. The greatest miracle was not the warning itself, nor the terrifying precision of the hour. It was the transformation of his heart, a closed mind forced to open, an unshakable certainty shattered, a life redirected. If you stayed until the end, it wasn't by chance. This story may have been meant for you. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here we share testimonies that challenge reason, stories many prefer not to tell, because the impossible is still happening today, sometimes with a name and an exact hour.